Cool. So Joe mentioned we had a big victory with the Rent Guidelines Board this year, and that's one that we can kind of put to our name and we're really excited about. So before I kind of give the recap on that, let me give a little bit of context if you aren't familiar with rent stabilization. So for some background, rent stabilization was a regulation established in New York City in the 60s to address a housing crisis. And then in 1974, the Emergency Tenant Protection Act extended rent stabilization to the rest of the state, is to any municipalities that opted in. At that time, municipalities in Westchester, Rockland, and Nassau counties opted in. Hey, we actually made it. So not the whole county though. So the whole town of North Hempstead opted in, as well as the cities of Glen Cove and Long Beach. Additionally, we have villages. These are all highlighted in yellow on that map. The villages of Floral Park, Hempstead, Rockville Center, Freeport, Lynbrook, and Cedarhurst. So to this day, there are still rent stabilized units in these municipalities, and year by year, those numbers dwindle. We're down to about 7,000 rent stabilized units in Nassau County. Now, rent stabilization still means rent increases each year, but it's determined by a yearly process with the Rent Guidelines Board. So each one of those counties has its own Rent Guidelines Board consisting of 9 members, all appointed by their county legislature, who meet annually to determine these rent adjustments. So for the Nassau Board, just like the other ones, they consist of 2 landlord members, 2 tenant members, and 5 public members. Keep in mind, all these board members, they have to have some kind of background in law or housing, and they are, by nature of being appointed, they all tend to be connected to political power. So what you're getting is a board of people who are very far removed generally from the realities of being a tenant, and they're deciding the fate of people who, their livelihoods desperately depend on not getting a rent hike each year. As a side note, our Rent Guidelines Board in Nassau was down 1 member, 1 landlord member, thankfully, this year, so that helped with the deliberations. All right, so this board each year, they determine 2 things. They listen to testimonies from both tenants and landlords, and they decide on rent hikes for both 1-year and 2-year leases. So you'll see 2 numbers, percentages, come out of each annual meeting. So I'm going to show you a chart here, just give you a history. Now, don't get overwhelmed by the bars here. Let's ignore the orange and yellow bars for now. But for each year, that dark blue bar shows you the percent increase for a 2-year lease. And then the overlaid green bar shows you the percent increase for a 1-year lease. You can see it in the 90s and the aughts, it got pretty rough at times. Imagine getting a 5% increase each year and you're in rent stabilized housing. Now, go all the way here to the right, you see in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, the Rent Guidelines Board acknowledged that this was not the time to be raising rent. Unfortunately, all it took was 1 year later, and they said, hey, pandemic's over, we can raise rent again. So in 21, there was a 1% and 2% increase in rent. In 2022, there was a 2% and 3% increase in rent. And so we were involved a little more tangentially in the previous years. And we said, hey, if we don't get involved, hands-on this year, this could get really worse because the landlords are champing at the bit and they're using all justifications they can to raise the rent. And so back to those orange and yellow bars, those apply to special decisions when the Rent Guidelines Board would make a separate determination for Hempstead. Hempstead has a lot of rent stabilized units in Nassau, and so sometimes they get special consideration if enough people come out. All right, so this year for 2023. The first hearing was in Great Neck. It was all landlords and no tenants, and those of us with WFP, we made our voices heard, but it was pretty clear that we needed to do some work to get, let tenants know about these meetings. By hearing number 2, which was in Long Beach, we showed up. We had a lot more of our allies show up, and we started reaching out, doing better. And number 3 in Hempstead, by this point, we had gotten our game together. We had flyered over 100 buildings, knocked on a lot of doors, spent a lot of time getting the word out. So tenants came out, they spoke, and they talked to conditions they were facing in their buildings that were so severe that even the most insensitive of members on the board couldn't help but feel upset at the situation. So finally, at the final vote meeting, this is a long process. This was end of June. They voted, and we won. There was a rent increase of 1% and 2% decided, and more importantly, or what we were excited about, is that we got a rent freeze in the village of Hempstead. So Hempstead represents about a third of all of our rent regulated units. And for the next year, they will, for both 1 and 2 year leases, they will not have any increase in their rents. For comparison's sake, New York City, they had thousands and thousands of people come out, and they still had rent increases of 3 and 4.5%. So this is a big victory for us. Even outside of Hempstead, naturally we wish everyone had a rent freeze, but just getting 1 and 2% for the whole county, which was lower than what we were anticipating, that means that that tenants are paying several $100s less in rent on the year, and on the whole, that represents over $1 million that would have otherwise been lining landlords' pockets that are staying with the people who need this money the most. These are more often senior citizens and our low-income neighbors. So we're very proud and excited of what we were able to accomplish here. So just kind of heading back to this chart. This 2023 decision, we came back down to a 1 and 2%, and we now have a special decision of Village of Hempstead, which is 0-0, which doesn't show up on the chart because hey, it's a 0, and that's a good thing. All right, and so that took us through the summer, and we met a lot of people, a lot of tenant leaders in certain buildings, people who had previously been organizing, and a rent freeze or a small increase is a good first step, but there's more things that we can work towards. And so we started working on a campaign to bring out rent reductions. So the same housing office of New York State that administers these rent regulated units, they offer rent reductions if you can prove that your landlord is not maintaining the building, such as elevators, hallways, etc., or they are not maintaining individual units, holes in the wall or plumbing issues, broken appliances, if there is heat and hot water issues, or if there has been a failure to provide leases. We met so many tenants who their landlords would not even give them a lease because they're trying to do all sort of shady business. So this is something we're working on building right now. We're working with tenant leaders. This means a lot of door knocking, getting information. We want to kind of help facilitate this process because it is work, and some of the people who need this help the most are least available to get this stuff done themselves without some help. So if you're interested in being part of this work, please let us know in the chat or reach out to us. It would be a big help. This is one of the few kind of projects we've worked on where there is a very clear material benefit for the people we were partnering with. So it's been really satisfying to say, hey, we saved our neighbors, hundreds of dollars, and it's money that they really desperately need. And that is it for this year. So we're going to build on this, but thanks to everyone that helped out. That includes a lot of us on this call. It was a pretty big win for us. And people around the state took notice, for sure. All right, so that is it for Rent Guidelines Board. Let me just check and see. Are we good to move on to next bit, Joe? Or should we move it up, save it for later?
It looks like we probably want to save it. I don't see Assemblymember Szilagyi here. Probably another few minutes till she shows up. But I do have a question. DCHR, right?
Yes.
Like, this is a loaded question. Like, do they have an office in Nassau County?
So yeah, that was another one of the many issues that we came across while organizing. So we're talking with tenants like, hey, you have a lot of issues in your building. You're basically dealing with a slumlord here, and have you met with the DHCR, the state office, asking for assistance? Well, that office used to be in Hempstead, and a few years ago they moved that office to Queens. So our Nassau office is in Queens, and it is not accessible to a lot of the tenants who need that help. So that is something that we've been highlighting. We're actually kind of working behind the scenes with other housing justice advocates who have been doing this work for a long time. We're working on trying to reform this Rent Guidelines Board process that happens every year, and that's one of the things we're fighting for. So we're involved in that as well, and so yeah, that's exciting. Thanks, Joe, for the leading question.
No problem.
Yeah.
I just want people to get the idea that it's not easy for a lot of people. It's very, especially you don't have time, and if the resources aren't even available in the county, what do you do? So we are trying to be cognizant of that, and be there for our neighbors, as Jeremy said.